Welcome back. If I get the times correctly, you will have this episode released literally on New Year's Eve. Actually, we will release it on midnight as we always do. So while people will be watching fireworks and reminiscing about the past year, I'm here reminiscing about what happened on Slo Mo last year. And as you see behind me, 2023 was a year where I actually gave myself the liberty to finally treat myself better, to finally not just be driven by my mission, which was taking me all over the world every day of the year almost, to building a home. So I allowed myself to, indulge in my hobby of aquariums and, plants. And I built a place that feels a lot like what I wanted to be in. There were moments in this year where I actually allowed myself to reflect deeply on topics that really mattered to me and make decisions that either have already changed my life or will, I'm sure, change my life going forward. It's been a tough year in many, many, many ways. I openly tell the world that this has been the first in many years, maybe 13, 14 years, where I actually felt a pain in my heart that I wasn't able to deal with because of the state of the world. It took me a lot of time to revisit all that I teach about happiness in order to find my stable mindset again. It was also a year here on Slo Mo where several guests have stopped me in my tracks in their conversations to get me to reflect on topics that really made a difference to me. I hope they did as well make a difference to you. In this episode, I will visit 5 of them just because they were personal nuggets of wisdom. I would probably recommend that you share as well your own nuggets of wisdom, because I'm sure that some guests that may have not affected me the same way might have affected you in a way that requires your reflection just as we speak and prepare for the new year. The first of those episodes that got me really thinking was my conversation with my dear, dear friend, wonderful human being, Caggie Dunlop. Caggie is a TV personality. She's a singer. She's a podcaster. She is now an author, of course, in 2023 of her book, Saturn Returns. And in our conversation, Caggie, with her typical beautiful purity, brought to my attention the idea of the astrological side of the cycles of our life, if you want. And with all due respect, I'm not the craziest person about astrology. I do believe there is a systemic cycle to things. I do believe that there is a possibility that the location of the stars affects our personalities or emotions or whatever. But I don't really align with things until I find the scientific side of them. And so, I don't yet find a reasonable explanation for how those things work. But I will say, when Caggie spoke about Saturn Returns and the cycles that we go through in our lives because of the positioning of the stars, and specifically in her, approach the position of Saturn, it really got me anchored in the idea of the seasons of our lives. And, I speak about that publicly quite often because as we navigate our lives, we need to learn to not only reflect and design our life based on our needs and perceived needs, but we need to notice that those needs change, our own personalities change, our own making changes based on the season of our life. So here's a clip from that conversation, episode number 230. If you're feeling changes in your own life, that would be a wonderful episode to revisit with Caggie Dunlop.
I was going to say that it's quite a female trait, but I don't necessarily know if that's true. But I would say that women are more inclined to shapeshift and alter themselves in relationship.
Sadly.
I'm going to make a sort of gender generalization there. And so within that, we can abandon ourselves quite easily because we've been taught to, we've been conditioned to. And it's something, you know, this idea that women are to be chosen, not choosing, that we only kind of come alive once taken off the shelf. So within that, we are constantly thinking of how we are going to alter ourselves. But what I've recognized is that actually all those times that I did do that and self-abandoned, somewhere down the path, I realized that this wasn't my path. And it wasn't the other person's fault because I'd done it. But to go back and find your own path, it becomes harder the further along you go. And so, you know, unconditional love and unconditional tolerance, it's like, I call it a bittersweet victory, because when we are in something that is unloving and that, you know, we're with someone that isn't right for us, it's not necessary to say that they're better or they're worse, but they're just not right for us. The nuances of why certain people work together are like often beyond our comprehension. But to be able to say, this doesn't meet my non-negotiables, and non-negotiables sounds like quite a harsh term when we're speaking about the realms of love, but it's so crucial. And to be able to check in with yourself and be like, this is not meeting me where I need to be met. And sometimes loving someone means letting them go. But the bittersweet victory in that is when we recognize that we've chosen ourselves. And that's something it took me a really long time to do.
Well, I actually don't think it's non-negotiables are a big thing for love at all. I mean, the reality is what I talk about explicitly in Finding Love is the idea that let's not call this love. Relationships are made up of so many other things. It's, you know, love is one of them, but in my view, love is fundamental. Love is always there. It doesn't have to end when the relationship ends. It doesn't have to begin when the relationship begins. And love itself doesn't necessarily dictate that we need to sleep together or be partners, or, you know, there are, you know, love is underlying those things. You can add intimacy to it and then become a couple, or you can, you know, add friendships to it and then you become really close friends, right? And I think the idea of non-negotiables are almost entirely around things other than love in the relationship. They are about things like respect. They are about things about like partnership, things like compatibility, right? And these are not touching love in itself in any way. So having non-negotiables is important. You know, sticking to them is difficult, but either way, they don't touch love. Love itself exists.
I understand that, but I also think that we create the love. So within the context of a relationship, that friction between one person saying, hey, this is what I need, and another person kind of either stepping in or not, is what creates a deeper level of intimacy and respect, which in turn are the kind of foundational concepts of love. Because if we don't state them and we self-abandon, but we don't communicate anything, that then builds contempt, resentment, and we then stop loving. We withdraw the love.
Yeah. I wouldn't be exaggerating if I told you that the single most impactful sentence I have absorbed in the entire series of Slo Mo so far has been during my conversation with Stephen Jenkinson in episode number 250. Stephen is a philosopher, Canadian philosopher, who lived 30 years of his life attending to the dying. He now lives as a farmer, and early in the conversation we discussed that this was one of my lifetime dreams, to live off the grid and be a farmer and build my own home, and all of those lovely dreams that I know for a fact I'll probably be a long time away from achieving. And Stephen went from that point to discussing how climate change is affecting our planet and how so many of the systems of the planet are breaking. Reminded me of another conversation I had with Rebecca Costa, the data analyst who wrote the book, The Fisherman's Rant. Similarly, Stephen is observing how humanity has made a few mistakes that led us to where we are here, and that there is a price to be paid for us to correct this. And in his very realistic way, he wonders if we can fix it without paying a steep price. And you know, I tend to be an optimist, and it's been on my mind quite significantly this year. As a matter of fact, 2023 was entirely dedicated for me attempting to really change things about our world at a very deep level, specifically from a point of view of the positioning of artificial intelligence and the relationship between ethics and artificial intelligence. And so I attempted to tell Stephen, but there is hope. And he said, and I quote, he said, "Hope is the wrong premise, Mo. When someone is dying, you don't tell them that there is hope, because when you tell them there is hope, they, one, don't live the days that they have, and two, they don't take the corrective action to make things go better for the reality of our situation." And I think that was a very significant statement for me. I don't believe that our world is dying. I do, however, believe that we are about to face some very interesting challenges, whether that's climate change, whether it's artificial intelligence, whether it's synthetic biology, whether it is economy or political, geopolitical challenges. And as I look at those, I realize that we have to be super realistic. And I think Stephen's statement was probably the one that stopped me most in my tracks when I heard it, of all the episodes and conversations I had here on Slo Mo. I can't recommend it enough. It was a very short episode because he had another commitment, time-based commitment. And so, give it some time and listen to it again. Episode number 250 with Stephen Jenkinson, which would allow you to maybe start the year with an anchor in reality, so that you make the best out of this year for you and your loved one.
I don't think we're approaching a point. I think we're there.
I'm trying to be a little kinder to the ears of my listeners.
Yeah. There, you know, again, this is a terminology that I think I learned when I was working with dying people. Dying people would refer to their dying in the future tense constantly. When I die. Or sometimes if I die.
Yes.
But never I'm dying. But you see, they were all dying. Not in some nominal Buddhist sense of the term that everybody's dying all the time, which is clearly not true. But they were actually metabolically dying. And they were employing their dying time to resist the realities of dying. And that seems to be a fairly good metaphor for modernity. That we are in some sense in a period where the onset of ruination is already occurring. And yet we talk about waiting to see and hypothetical questions like, how do we do this and do that? And I think we're better served, and the world is better served, if we just change the tense of all of these ruminations and start saying, how have we done thus and so? Because if you can faithfully witness to how things have come to be as they are, then the notion about what does one do in the face of this storm becomes more available, because it's a response to something, not a kind of generic reactivity. It's a particular kind of, as we'd say in English, response ability. So for me, I'm not a fan of hope. I don't find that there's any obligation necessarily among grown-ups, you know, sentient grown-ups, to pat each other on the shoulder and reassure each other, and that if we just do this, and if we find some equanimity, and if we just change our socks, and if enough people change their socks all at once, well, the globe will tip. And this is not how it happened, and it's not how it's going to happen either. The truth of the matter is, it seems, you're familiar with the English poet W.H. Auden?
Of course, yeah.
Okay, so he has a wondrous but kind of ruinous observation he's made about modernity. He said, "It seems to me that we would rather be defeated than be persuaded." And so there's a lot of circumstance now, geopolitically, socioeconomically, where the powers that be and the great sort of middle class, if you will, are there with their arms folded, playing let's see what happens. But doing that is the answer to the question, what happens? This is what happens now. Waiting to see if it's really that bad. Waiting to see if people like me are not just exaggerating, or worse, and that we're secretly hopeless, and we're just vectoring our hopelessness, from podcast to podcast, which I'm not hopeless at all. I'm free of the notion of hope, which is to say, the last time I checked it out thoroughly, hope is very much a future tense circumstance. That's where it actually operationalizes in the future. But it has immense consequence for the present. But for example, hope is completely not required to mobilize on behalf of a better day. No,
I agree.
I think one of the things we're doing right now is mobilizing, you and I at this very moment, mobilizing on behalf of a better day. I'm not saying we're being very successful or very effective, but at least in intention, this is what we're doing. But look what's not necessary. You and I don't have to hope we're sitting here talking to be able to sit here and talk. Hope is completely not required to engage the dilemmas that we're beginning to talk about now. If you require hope, you're importing it from elsewhere. Yeah. So hope is always a compromise of the present moment. Nobody hopes for the way it is. We hope for the way it isn't.
Correct.
Okay. So my orientation to life is to do everything I can to inhabit the way it is.
That's so beautiful. Another episode that has definitely been one of my favorites, because they are my heroes, but also a very strong reminder of something I stand strongly for, was the conversation with the minimalists. And while the documentary The Minimalists has really affected my life very strongly, shaped my attitude, I didn't expect that the conversation would be so philosophical and deep in so many ways. And I found that to be quite enriching, especially on the sides of what minimalism really means. And, does it really stop at the number of items you have in your household? And what makes us hoard so much? What makes us keep so many things? I found that to be quite a defining, a moment for me to reflect and revisit my approach to having a lighter life by becoming more, as they mentioned, a utilitarian, someone who really only keeps in his life things that bring him joy or utility. A wonderful conversation in every possible way. As you head into a new year, you may want to revisit 251, not just for getting stuff out of your life, but perhaps getting concepts and self-limiting beliefs out of your life. Episode 251 with the Minimalists.
Yeah, that's a great way to look at minimalism. It's a way to kind of help us get back to our roots, to get back to the nature. I mean, I think when you bring up these poor, communities in the world, I mean, by definition of things, yes, they're not cluttering their lives. But aren't their lives cluttered with so many other things, though, with cell phones and advertisement and this wanting? Yeah. So it's interesting. I mean, even if take the things out of it, minimalism is this philosophy that kind of helps us get back to those roots, to get back to that nature. Yeah, I mean, we see, and here, at least here in the United States, we see 5,000 to 10,000 advertisements a day.
No
I mean,
way.
that's more than a million.
Oh my
Yeah,
God.
I mean, that's more than a million. Yeah, and that is, it programs us, and like that those ideas, they seed in us, and they create these desires that we never would have had otherwise. But yeah, it is fascinating how yeah, I've never looked at it that way, but minimalism certainly can be a tool that people can use to get back to that natural state in a way.
Yeah. So because I spend more time working with people who economically would be categorized as poor than I do working with people who maybe have too many luxury goods, here's an aspect of minimalism that I think the philosophical side can really contribute to. So I'm just going to give you one example. One of my inner city students, we were in class in a small group, and we were talking about dreams. And this is a young Black man, about 17 years old. And he states what his dream is. And his dream is to be a mechanical engineer. And I thought that was an interesting answer. And I'm thinking, oh, okay, this should be pretty easy to workshop, because usually students might say something like a rapper or an actor. And it's kind of hard, right? Because you don't want to contradict their ambition, but there's no clear, easy path for it. And so you got to be really delicate and nuanced with how you talk about it with them. But he says mechanical engineer. I'm thinking, oh, this should be pretty easy. And so I ask him, what's the hard part? And he says, the hard part is where I'm from. And I say, well, what do you mean? And he expresses to me a firm conviction that the number one reason he doesn't believe he can become a mechanical engineer is because of the neighborhood he has grown up in and that he still lives in, and because of the life of his father, who is now in jail because of a life of crime, right? And so here is someone that's having a really difficult time imagining him ever making it out of the hood and ever being able to fulfill his dream, because he has a story going on that says, I can never do what my father did not achieve. I am destined for a life in jail like my dad. I can never be bigger and better than the neighborhood I grew up in. Now, that story is not his fault. That's a story that has been imposed upon him by the reality of his harsh circumstances, by cultural elements, and so on. And in addition to that, there are aspects of that story that have some very strong sociological and economic arguments, right? That give him every reason to believe that. But when you're talking to someone like that, you don't have the luxury to sit back with a glass of wine and just say something that sounds virtuous. You've got to speak into this young man's life in a way that helps him unpack that baggage so that he can be able to create some options for himself without blaming himself for the challenging circumstances that he's
Correct.
in. And so we begin to have a conversation about what it means to have parents that live a certain way and what it does and does not say about you. We begin to have conversations about what it does and does not mean to grow up in a certain neighborhood. And we have to approach this sympathetically, understanding the things that are beyond his control, but also in a way that encourages him to believe in his possibilities, pointing him to the resources that he didn't know about, that his mentors never showed him because he doesn't have the mentors, right? And so this is just one example of how we can have baggage in the form of stories, in the form of self-defeating beliefs, in the form of self-condemnation, in the form of having people who told us you aren't anything and you'll never be anything. And that can be as powerful as the baggage that comes from having too many things.
Oh, it's so beautifully said. Early in the year, I was speaking at the Sharjah Entrepreneurship Forum, a wonderful event. I mean, Sharjah in general is the sort of the cultural capital where books and culture is discussed quite often in the UAE. And so, I was there. It was a lovely event, and we were sort of arranging for me to meet with some of the guests. And I have to admit, I was a bit struggling with time, and it was, a very busy event with a lot of people that I know. And so I felt a little drained, but we had already arranged for me to meet with my next guest here on this episode, April Rani. And she, was sort of like, oh, we can do it tomorrow, but I didn't want to go tomorrow. So anyway, we found a tiny room that wasn't very properly air conditioned. So it was actually quite hot. in there. And we started a conversation that we just could not stop. I mean, despite the fact that you may see a few drops of sweat on my forehead every now and then, I just couldn't stop chatting with April. We started from her defining moment when she lost her parents in an accident that really flipped her life upside down. Something that I believe I can relate to very deeply. And we branched from there to all kinds of vulnerabilities and wisdom in a wonderful conversation. That was, I think, early in the year, a very important reminder for me of the value of what I'm attempting to do. I mean, sometimes, even though I hope you don't notice it, I feel overwhelmed with all of the tasks I've assigned to myself, with all of the challenges that the world throws your way, and all of the biases of the technology world and social media that perhaps does not always favor my kind of message to the world. And when I spoke to April, I think she anchored me back into maximum focus on my mission. And I will say openly, because of April and so many others that have helped me this year, it's been a very effective year. Difficult as it may have been, I think I have never had a message spread as fast and wide as my message on artificial intelligence. So thanks for all of those that helped me. And specifically early in the year, thanks to my conversation with April Renee, which was episode number 231, which was lovely, very wise in every possible way. Maybe you'd have the time to revisit that.
What I love is you're just teeing up these wonderful. So I can look at the superpower and say, Mo, like this superpower is already quite strong for you because you're practicing it, and it's a practice you opted into. You could have booked things, you could have done the planning, and no, you made a choice but this is grooving this mental muscle. Yeah. And I love everything about what you just said, because it's exactly what we're talking about. And one thing I didn't mention in here is that for this particular superpower, when people are like, how do we get started? I'm always like, the number one is travel. Travel gives you such a great template. Yeah. Because for most people, travel is a kind of adventure they pick. I'm going to choose to travel somewhere. And within that, I can have a lot of experiences that might feel scary, but I'm guessing the booking things last minute, not only empowering, really freeing.
A total freedom.
Freedom. And all of a sudden it's like your lungs expand, your heart expands, you feel lighter. Yeah. Yeah.
You do it a couple of times and you realize, why was I worried about this?
Yeah. Right. So one fun side note, this is more my personal history. It was shortly after my parents died when I was admittedly in the throes of grief, and I was having a really hard time. But both, just a little more context, both my parents were teachers. And we didn't have a lot growing up. It wasn't about material possessions or money. But the two things we were allowed to spend money on were education and travel. They were my dad was a cultural geographer. So he studied maps and migratory patterns, and cultural diversity was a huge theme growing up. But I bring this up because I was on the one hand dealing with, okay, I've lost them. I need to do something with, one, I have to be self-sufficient. I have to take care of myself. So I can't just just go do nothing. I have to build a career. But at the same time, I know I might die tomorrow. So it needs to be a career that makes sense to me and is contributing to society. But then also, I need to do something that would make my parents proud, because now, I have this, I don't know if it's guilt or pride or who knows what, but that's a problem. And all sorts of other things, including some mental health challenges and just depression and whatnot. But I share this all because in between undergraduate and graduate school, when my mentors were saying, you need to go work at a consulting firm or a bank. And I was like, no, I don't. But what do I need to do? And I remember I was 21 when I wonder how I would feel if the tables were reversed, but I had some extended family members who were concerned about me. And they were like, okay, you're not going to go do that. What are you going to do? And I was like, my plan is not to have a plan. And they were like, yes. Oh boy.
Sounds 21.
Oh boy. Exactly. Well, 21 with no parental oversight. right? Lots of energy.
As if there is ever parental oversight.
True. But what was fascinating, and I know I'm taking a bit of a tangent here, but I hope it's helpful to at least some of the folks listening in. It was an interesting combo in my 20s where I had lots of ideas and energy. I've always had like abundant energy. I had a very clear sense of how fragile life was, a kind of, not a death wish, but I truly didn't think I had long to live. It was irrational, but and I had no parental accountability, meaning if I could figure out a way to do something, there was no
one to tell me no.
But I had to figure it out and I had to take responsibility for it. And that was a really interesting mix because I was like, okay, my plan's not to have a plan, but I knew it was important, particularly my parents did expect me to go on to graduate school. They did expect me to contribute to society. They did not necessarily expect me. It wasn't about making a bunch of money and having a fancy title. It was contributing to the greater good. But I realized how little I knew about the world and so education and travel. And I was like, I don't know what I'm going to do, but I do know that I want to see more of the world and find a way to travel and find a way to understand how does the rest of the world live?
Yeah.
And so long story short, I spent 4 years without a permanent address, with a backpack. This is pre-Airbnb, pre-smart. I didn't even have a mobile phone.
Yeah.
This was nothing. This was getting off the bus and having the grandma be like, you look interesting. You're a single young female. You'll stay with me.
I was just going to say, and you don't even look like me with a beard and a muscular
No, I'm the
beard.
young blonde who's like, you must be lost. Speaking of get lost. And actually that's the intro to that chapter is the story of me in rural Romania shortly after the Iron Curtain comes down.
Yes.
Bukovina. I don't know if you've ever been to Bukovina, these painted monasteries, backside of beyond.
Yeah, beautiful.
Yeah, this was back when there were dirt roads. They were not a UNESCO heritage site, but I had read about them in my art history class and I was going to find my way there. So I get people, single, blonde, fair-skinned, what in the world? She is clearly lost. And people would be like, how can you travel on your own? That must be frightening and scary. What they didn't realize is what they saw as a liability, being young and female and solo and foreign, was my asset, greatest asset, because grandmothers in particular across the board were like, you have to be lost.
Yeah.
Here, come in.
Yeah.
Let me take care of you. Let me feed you. Let me show you around. I had families open their doors left, right, and center precisely because I was solo and female.
That's so...
Which is fascinating. But I bring this up because back to those 4 years, to earn income, I researched and guided hiking and biking trips around the world. Got this job as a tour guide, which was so much fun, which gave me enough income not to pay a mortgage or raise a family, but plenty of income to go
grandmas.
And exactly. So I did that for 4 years. But back to your point about my routine was not having any idea when I woke up that morning where I would sleep that night. I knew where I was heading on my itinerary, but we'll figure it out. And I don't think I appreciated at that time because I was so focused on other things like the grieving and what am I going to do with my life? But I realize now that I was grooving that superpower. I was really getting comfortable with the not knowing, but learning to celebrate it. I got so excited about where might I be tonight? I don't know, but it's going to probably be, it was always cool, even if it wasn't necessarily comfortable or luxurious. It was something new. It was something that taught me something, exposed me to something different.
On October 13th this year, Slo Mo gave me the biggest gift it has ever given me. I was rushing through the streets of London. I was late for a board meeting, and somehow life in a freakishly obvious way was delaying me so that I get to a specific street corner at a specific moment in time where I find someone approaching me from the other side, looking at me as if she knows me. And so I asked, I said, do we know each other? And she said, no, you don't know me, but I'm a friend of Carly's, who's a common friend between us, and I follow your work. I love Slo Mo, and I just wanted to say hi. And I was honored, so I said hi, and we chatted for a quick 4 or 5 minutes, so that, I get to know her quickly. And turns out that Hannah Lord, who is a therapist that specializes, she really dedicates a lot of her work to understanding the depth of what her client needs in a way that often involves sort of the alpha masculine type clients I was doing the love and romance series at the time. I was running short of an episode that I needed very quickly, where we speak about the masculine. We hadn't spoken about the man's view, if you want, of love and romance. So I said, come to my podcast. And then we both rushed. She had a client that she also changed direction to go to, and I had my board meeting. A few days later, we got together to record the episode number 268, and I was blown away. I mean, I don't know if you noticed, but I was in two worlds at the same time. I was listening attentively to what Hannah had to say about love and relationships. I was blown away by how much we agreed on, which in a way is sometimes controversial because, my views of that is not always very straightforward. But at the same time, I was really, what can I say, very attracted to Hannah. I found myself halfway through the podcast, might be up to you to find out what moment that exactly was, telling myself clearly in my mind, oh God, please make her mine. Yeah, we had a very, very positive response for the podcast. And, after we finished recording the bits that you didn't see, where we chatted for a while more. And I asked if she would like to stay in touch. And she welcomed the idea. She said, yeah, let's have coffee when you're in London. I was in London literally 4 days later. And so around October 18th, we started to agree that we will go out for a coffee and continue to chat. And then I did something I've never done before. I asked her if she was single, and she did something she's never done before and said yes, because she normally avoids that question from someone she doesn't really know well. And so I said, so scrap the coffee. Can I please take you out on a date? We went on our first date on October 18th. And I knew I found what I was looking for. I knew that for the longest time, I've been looking for someone that really is a match for my views and values in life, and who truly is intelligent, gentle, kind, loving in the way that Hannah is. So it wasn't long after that we started dating. It wasn't long after that we decided to get married. And on December 17th, less than 2 months after our first date, we actually got married. So thank you for the Slo Mo listeners. I always told you that Slo Mo would bring me this opportunity to meet those incredible humans that enrich my life in ways I never expected. I can tell you for sure, I never expected to meet someone I love so dearly, someone who's adding so much to my life, someone I'm willing to commit to here on Slo Mo. So thank you so much for that. Hannah is an incredible, wise woman. So yeah, you may want to go back to episode number 268 and look at it again to meet my wife, Hannah Lord.
Oh, wow. That's quite a question, because I've honestly had so many. I don't know where to start.
We have time, Hannah.
You're not letting me get away with this, are you, Mo?
If you want to, I can, but I don't think the listeners will be happy about that.
No, I'm more than happy to share. I think what was interesting for me in the early days was how much we all project out, how much we project what we can't hold for ourselves and what we don't want to own for ourselves. And it's easiest to put onto somebody else our shadow material, if you like, and then using that shadow. And that's very Jungian thinking from Carl Jung. And the shadow is it's the material that we can't hold and we banish to the unconscious because we don't want to look at it. And that's often environmental. So maybe in my case, I was told never to show off. I was told not to get a big head, I came into this world, singing and dancing and like a little lovable lunatic, wore my heart on my sleeve all the time. And I was always told to be quiet, that I was too much, that, I was embarrassing myself. That wasn't okay. And that's from family and at school. And so you just learn, like going back to that kind of data coding, you're processing information all the time and you quickly adjust. Like we have these fantastic minds that will quickly do a bit of a switch around and be like, okay, don't do that anymore. Do more of this. And quite often, if there's a part of ourself, of our soul, our core nature, which is most on display when we come into the world as little kids, we're most ourselves when we're small infants. And I believe that children are so intelligent and we can learn so much from them. I think there's far too much, infantilizing that goes on. But quite often, if a part of our core nature is rejected, we will start to become, we won't just dumb it down, we'll become the direct opposite. And usually people who are very cold and unfeeling and guarded quite often have the most love to give. And that's why it's so painful for them. And it becomes their shadow material and it becomes fiercely defended. And that was definitely my experience. And that's why it breaks my heart whenever I'd get feedback from people that said like, oh, you're very distant, you're very guarded, you're very cold, because your soul knows. And it's like, no, I'm not. And it's there screaming inside. So I think that was an interesting realization, that actually those parts of me are still alive. They're still in there, but it's learning to reintegrate them and learning that they're okay. And that the early information that I received is old information. And that's not getting it into the conscious mind, into the here and now of going, okay, well, but what would happen if I express myself like this now to these people, to this person? Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, and I think that takes us back to that idea of feminine masculine. I mean, that one of the most guarded sides of us is the feminine. It's like, it's weak, it's not very, practical. What if he sees me? What if he knows me? And, in my typical relationships, regardless of how feminine a woman appeared on the outside, when you give a woman space, more feminine would show up. So can I just agree the definitions before we go deeper into this? Because I think a lot of our listeners may not understand what is feminine and masculine. I mean, how do you define them?
My definition of feminine and masculine has nothing to do with gender. It's more about the active qualities of the masculine, the doing. And the feminine qualities are the receptive, so the being. And that's why we live in a hyper masculine society, because we're not okay with just being. We fear it. We don't want to stay still. It feels unsafe. And so we're active. And that is irrespective of gender. That's everybody. And we are, as a collective, we're out of balance. And as individuals, we all feel out of balance as well. And that's a scary situation to be in, I think.
So that's it. This is the very last thing I tell you at the end of 2023. Thank you so much for giving me the opportunity to be your host once a week, on an opportunity to slow down and meet such amazing people and create such amazing impact on my own personal life, because you're listening to Slo Mo. If you didn't, I wouldn't come across those incredible nuggets of wisdom. And this year, I wouldn't have come across love. For that, I am eternally grateful. I ask you to slow down a bit more in 2024. 2024 is going to be a year that requires a lot of reflection and a lot of self-care, self-love, composure. It's a year where you need a circle of close people to you, close friends, but also close advisors, which I hope to be bringing a few of those to your life in 2024. We finished the Love and Romance series. We're going to go back to normal programming, if you want, starting the year with 2 incredible episodes, Marissa Peer and Africa Brooke, to try and set the tone for what it is that we can do, during tough times, but also to honor ourselves in a good way. Whatever it is that you do for me here on Slo Mo, I ask you to help me grow this podcast, please. As you know, I don't monetize Slo Mo. This is an effort to bring wisdom to the world as part of 1 Billion Happy. And I do that in an attempt to really spread a message of wisdom and happiness to millions of people around the world. It takes me the same amount of effort, the same amount of resources to record any of the episodes that you hear. If you can help me make it reach tens or hundreds of thousands more, then the impact goes much further. And it would be truly the biggest gift you can ever give me. So continue to rate this podcast highly on your podcast player. Share it truly with a strong recommendation with people you have coffee with or people you're texting with on WhatsApp. Come subscribe to our YouTube channel, which has grown significantly this year, Mo Gawdat Official on YouTube. And please like the videos, subscribe, turn on the notifications so that you get the new episodes in video. And all in all, just help me spread the wisdom that you hear here. So if you even just take one nugget of wisdom and give it to another person, I may not be able to know that you did that because it won't show in my numbers, but it will make a difference to one human. And life is all about making a difference to one human at a time. I cannot thank you enough once again for the time that you've given me in 2023, the heartbeats, the precious heartbeats of your life that you spared for you to visit me and my guests. It's been incredible for me to have that joy. It's been an honor for me to have the opportunity to have you listen to me. Thank you so much for your time and for your support. I ask you to slow down as always, because regardless of how fast this year is going to be, there will always be time. It will even be more important to slow down. I love you all for listening. I thank you all for your support, and I will see you next year.